Hi, everybody, and welcome to this discussion panel. My name's Ollie Jones. I'm Associate Director of Sustainability and Innovation at Cundall, a multidisciplinary engineering practice who are making some real ripples and disruption in the sustainability space. But today, I have the absolute pleasure of following an excellent presentation from Paul. Thank you very much, Paul. And bringing online some phenomenal panel speakers to share their insights with us. So we're going to do this rapid fire. You'll see people throwing hands up all over the place just to cut in and have a chat. But we've got a limited amount of time to speak to our panel, so let's dive straight in. We've heard from Paul. I'd love to pass over now just to a really quick introduction from each of our panel members, who you are, why you're here, and tell us a little bit more about how you're working with the circular economy. All, of course, in under about 60 seconds. So let's dive straight over to Tristan.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Ollie. Tristan Olivier, Chief Visionary Officer of the Institute of Specialist Surveyors and Engineers, and also their Technical Director. I have a particular interest in regenerative management, holistic management, so looking forward to responding to some of Paul's insights there. Yes, driven by the fact that there is a very human element to all of this, that is largely overlooked. And of course, if these grand projects of ours don't actually fulfill the survival and health needs of the species, you wonder why we bother in the first place. So I'm driven by a very human-centered focus.
Cheers, Tristan. Trudi.
Good morning, Trudi Sully. I'm the European UK lead for Industrialised Design and Construction at Mott MacDonald. So slightly different perspectives to many of the others perhaps today, in that I come from innovation and manufacturing backgrounds, and where I work is about championing approaches that adopt manufacturing related systems such as design for manufacture and assembly, product platforms and industrialization, all of which drive better productivity and performance while reducing waste, rationalizing design, better use of materials, and primarily a focus on whole life value. So considering the building from thought through to end of life as well.
Thanks, Trudi. Melissa?
Hello, hi, I'm Melissa Zanocco. I've recently moved to work in capital projects and infrastructure at Accenture, and previously led the Infrastructure Client Group programme. However, today I'm here as one of the instigators of our shared understanding a circular economy in the built environment. And this brought together the global built environment sector with the circular economy community to agree the core concepts that are going to guide our transition to a circular economy. And it calls for kind of collective action to put circular principles at the heart of how we design and manage and build and use our existing buildings and infrastructure, particularly because, as Paul was saying, that's going to have a significant impact on addressing the global systemic challenges like net zero emissions, the climate resilience, protecting biodiversity and social equity. And there's a section in that document on systems, and within that, one of the principles is to make the most of data and digital approaches. So hopefully we're going to discuss that today.
Absolutely. And Elle?
Good morning. My name's Elle George. I'm founder of building consultancy Elevate. I've been working as a sustainability engineer for more than 2 decades across commercial and residential building, civil engineering projects, and working in consultancy and contracting. I'm pleased to be part of this panel, and today I'm going to be focusing my responses more on retrofit and specifically the importance of the data that we need in retrofit and adopting circular economy approaches when we retrofit our buildings. I've spent the last 2+ years working on a social housing retrofit programme. So obviously being retrofit, at least we are reusing buildings rather than building new, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the circularity approaches within retrofit have been optimised. In fact, it's probably the case we're far from it. And specifically, I've been working to industrialise retrofit, which means some of the stuff that Trudi's just touched on around adopting manufacturing principles and standardised solutions.
Well, I'm looking forward to diving into that discussion on retrofit. I think carrying on from Paul's theme of urban mining, we're in for a treat mining this panel for some phenomenal responses. Again, all rapid fire just to keep our audience awake and engaged just pre-lunch. I'm sure everybody's ready to grab something to eat. Let's dive straight in with what do you think we've got right with regards to focusing on the circular economy and what we're doing with data, and what do we need to focus on improving in order to support that emerging circular economy? The key there is, how is data going to support this? So what have we got right so far, and what do we need to improve? Paul?
Well, I think in my presentation, I talked about areas where we are getting it right, which is where we need high level, accurate data. We also need granular data, which needs to be able to talk to other sets of data in a standard way, which people can understand. And that data flow then needs to lead to intelligent decisions being made. So, and that should and needs to support the value that you get from the circular economy.
Yeah.
And at the moment, if we want the circular economy to flourish, which I think we all do, we need to demonstrate that value. So the data needs to support where that value is, so we can get investment flows that leads to material flows.
And Tristan, how about you? Oh, you're on mute, mate.
Apologies for that. I want to take a step back, actually, because I think it would help to try and clarify what we actually really mean by circular economy. And the reason being is that nature works in cycles. And I think what we are talking about is, as it were, a cyclical or a cycle-based economy, not a circular one. And the reason I pick up on that is that a circle is a very flat 2D representation of the way things work. So I was particularly heartened to hear Paul talk about the temporal granularity of things, because actually, if I can show you a spiral, and this is how time actually works, you don't end up in the same place that you began. There is a temporal shift. Time passes, and I think that time factor is really, really important, particularly if we have to consider, when we say circular economy is a good thing, which it absolutely is, by the current definition, as it were, as a world term. But I think genuine circularity can only be achieved locally. I don't think we're going to be circulating things sort of between here and China, but to do it locally in the same way that nature does over short distances, that seems to me, as it were, where the circularity really happens. So I think it might be worth exploring that side of things, because then that gives you the context for the extent to which you need to have this data exchange and interoperability issues, because the more localized it is, the less specialist and sort of formal the landscape, if you like, needs to be for the communication, because there's some down the road.
But let's jump to Paul very briefly. But I saw Melissa nodding along, so
I just think there's a challenge there. So in the natural world, you have migration. And the reason for that is because mammals and birds and butterflies, they go from one place to the other for food, for the right habitat requirements. And in our world, we have materials that we now need in an urbanized environment, which we don't find in our national borders. So I understand what you're saying about self-sufficiency, but there's a challenge there around access to resources that we now depend upon, thinking about rare earth metals.
And Melissa, I saw you nodding along there. What were your thoughts?
Yes, no, I agree about sort of replicating nature and sort of learning from it. But no, to go back to the original question about what's kind of going well, I think that there's a growing awareness about circular economy, and that's really important. People have even heard of it, even the fact there's this panel. But I think at the moment there are pockets of best practice. And I think there are people that are out there doing amazing things, and actually many of them are listed at the beginning of our shared understanding, so it's actually quite a useful list there. So for an example, the good things, like I've just attended in the last few months, I've just attended a ministerial roundtable on circular economy. There's been a UK launch of the Excess Materials Exchange, and there's been a Royal Academy of Engineering NEPC workshop on critical materials. And actually, as we speak, there's the World Circular Economy Forum going on in Brussels, which is like COP for circular economy. Also positive, I think the use of digital twins and AI is growing, and we're moving forward on creating the data sharing infrastructure to allow the digital twins to connect within organisations, between organisations, across sectors. So things like Credo, the climate resilience demonstrator, I think that's an excellent example of this, which is helping like Anglian Water, UK Power Networks and BT to better plan for and respond to flooding. But what I think we need is a more systemic approach, so that the isolated pockets of best practice are actually part of a bigger plan that's accelerating us towards a circular economy.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Melissa. Trudi.
So you're sort of taking it back to my perspective about practicality and doing something in the grassroots side of things, if you like. We've actually had huge amounts of positive action over the last few years in terms of developing processes, tools, guidance, backed up by government policy. And this is specifically in relation to delivering, maintaining, operating, and refurbishment of our infrastructure across the board, okay? So that is there. What I find deeply frustrating and driving me nuts is the lack of action and progress and actually doing something rather than now talking about it and pointing at it. And my specific example, which is my bugbear of the day, month, possibly year, is the Value Toolkit. So that was specifically designed by the Construction Innovation Hub, funded by government and developed by more than 100 industry partners to be a tool that helps manage data, make better decisions about creating value in everything that we do. It was gifted to the Infrastructure and Projects Authority nearly 2 years ago, and nobody's seen it in the light of day, which is just disgusting. For one, it's a waste of millions of pounds.
Yep.
For another, it was really designed to help us on this journey and to actually follow up on the policy that's being created. So we need to see things actually happening and coming out of government, not just sitting there gathering dust.
Yeah, I feel your frustrations, Trudy. Elle.
Totally agree with you, Trudi. From my perspective, talking about retrofit and the work that I've been doing for the last couple of years, are we heading in the right direction? Yes, but it's so slow, it might as well be a no. But, you know, things are improving. If you think about a couple of years ago at mainstream conferences like this one, the word retrofit was barely mentioned. It might as well have been a swear word, even though if we look at the buildings that exist that we'll have by 2050, 80% of them already exist, of the buildings that we'll have in 2050. So we really need to translate our focus over towards existing structures. And there is now some central government funding, and specifically in the area I've been working in, to upgrade our housing stock, but we need much, much more investment, especially in technologies and the process that I was mentioning previously around industrialising retrofit. And we have made great strides, but obviously just retrofitting isn't enough. We need to think about material recovery and thinking about the way we look at the performance of buildings in the pre-scenario and in the post scenario to understand what works, because it's quite an immature process still. We've got a lot of measuring to do to say, how have we retrofitted, what materials have we used, and have they worked? Because some materials aren't going to work and some will, so we need to understand the data behind the performance and then make informed decisions.
Thanks, Elle. So just to remind the audience as well, we've got a live question feed going on here with a crack squad of people behind the scenes making sure that those questions get through to us as fast as possible. There's one that's come in from Ross. I just want to throw that out there. I've got a feeling this might flow towards Tristan or Paul here, so heads up, guys. But anyone go for it? Hands up. How can we integrate BIM and nature? Wildlife plays an important role in design, and most designs tend to be far too human-centered. So who wants to throw themselves in for that one?
Very happy to launch in, if you like.
Let's go, Paul, then go, Melissa.
I couldn't agree more.
Paul?
Okay, yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Ross, actually. I mean, I trained as an ecologist. And one of the reasons I work in the built environment is to actually start to reduce that pressure from consumption back onto the natural environment. I think there's a big education piece here, really, sadly. We really need to understand the ecology of where we're building and learn from nature, because nature has evolved over millions of years to actually mitigate and understand, to live with its climate and to maximise the use. And there is no waste in nature, going back to Tristan's point. So I think there's an education piece. In Grimshaw, quite a lot of us have been trained around regenerative design, understanding ecology. We have biomimicry and biophilia incorporated into our designs. We always ask the question, how can we integrate nature into our designs? But it's not mainstream. So it's a big challenge.
So, but Melissa?
Yes, I was going to take a slight step out, so not the specific question about BIM, but more importantly about sort of the whole way that we manage the built environment. And so I said that we had this section on systems in our shared understanding, and we described the built environment as a complex, interconnected system of systems where you've got economic infrastructure and social infrastructure, and they're inextricably linked. Then you've got nature, and they're all inextricably linked. And now we're starting to get cyber-physical infrastructure, and it's all inextricably linked. And yet what we do is we build siloed individual projects and standalone, rather than seeing them as an intervention on the overall system, and rather than seeing that they're interlinked with nature. So I think almost a step before the BIM part is that actually getting sort of leaders and getting the industry to understand, and this is actually in Transforming Infrastructure Performance, so IPA's, what they published about 2 years ago, is that what you're doing is adding an intervention on the overall system, and the system is made up of nature, which is inextricably linked with everything else. And then I think that leads us onto the data and digital, because when we think of taking that system approach, and someone's talked about what I would call place-based decision making as well, as like how do you make decisions for a particular place, it sounds very complicated, and we don't know how to manage that complexity. And that is where the digitalisation can help us to address kind of scale and complexity, and it supports us in making those decisions and kind of gives us that confidence that we can manage the built environment in that way.
Yeah, that allows us to correlate a lot of that hugely complex set of information as well that you just mentioned there, Melissa. Tristan, very quickly, what were your thoughts on that?
Oh, I just wanted to pick up on actually what Melissa said just there, and then your comment too in closing, is that complexity is the big challenge, and I think there is a danger of getting bogged down in the data, and we need to be able to think bigger, extract broader themes, so that we can actually be working realistically with those, so that holistic approach has the right sort of inputs it needs. And just an aside, if you actually write down the word silo and then write down the word holistic, which is its total opposite, the word silo is written in reverse within the word holistic.
Nice, Tristan. Right, moving on. We're going to talk about barriers very briefly. I don't want to dwell on some of the problems, but let's just touch on some of the barriers. I mean, there's quite a lot of problems to dwell on. Overarchingly, what barriers are there in our way of realizing this change? And that also ties in, and I think we'll dive back to Melissa for this one, because that also ties in with the question that's come in from Neil. In how do we share, and this is a lot more specific, I'll give you a heads up on that, but how do we share the Credo model to local authorities, not limited to districts and county council, as Neil feels we are way behind in showcasing this, in his opinion. So, Melissa, barriers and maybe a response to Neil.
Well, interestingly, that's exactly what I would say one of the biggest barriers is. So if we're talking specifically from a data and digital rather than just any barriers to circular economy, then I would say that the biggest blocker is integration and interoperability. It's the right people not having the right information to make the decisions when they need it. And in the circular economy, as we're talking about the system approach, there's there's a recognition that an action in one part of the system has a consequence in another part of the system, but at the moment there's no visibility across that. So that is what I would say, and so that's why I was mentioning before data sharing infrastructure. We are starting to make progress on that, and hopefully we can move towards having things like connected digital twins. But for now, it's difficult. But what I will also just say in barriers, because I have to say this, and someone's already said it's about people. You know, we know that data and digital are just enablers, and the real change is going to come in people's behaviour. So it's also not thinking that it's just going to be a shiny tech or AI. I think a lot of people think that's the thing that's going to solve all our problems, and that we also need to overcome the cultural barriers. And that's at a global, national, organisation and individual level. So we're kind of looking at a socio-technical change.
Mm-hmm. And Trudi, jumping to you on this, barriers.
The socio-technical, great word to finish on, because it really is the crossover. And We talk about the barriers to change a lot, and we could run a whole conference on it, but it would probably be pretty depressing. There is still significant risk aversion, and I understand that because in the economic climate we find ourselves in, people see the news headlines about failures and about things going wrong, and that is repeated far more often than the good news. So I think you have to be a bit more confident in experimenting and looking and exploring, because this has to be the future. It's not like there is a choice here. We have to change. We have to do better. And so you have to have more confidence to start exploring how to make those changes. And as I said, that there's an awful lot of work has been done to help people in that. You just have to get the right people doing a bit of digging and helping you to shape that forward movement.
Thanks, Trudi. Elle?
Everyone's kind of touched on the points I was going to make around risk aversion, cultural resistance, and lack of awareness and education about this. But one point that we haven't touched on is around the language that we use to talk about these things. We need to be talking to the people on the street about this rather than all the experts. And we've just fallen into the trap that many do of just using the word credo, and probably some of the audience don't know what that is. So perhaps someone who's better to explain what that acronym is could do so, because we're just so busy using long words, acronyms, and talking to each other in an echo chamber rather than getting out to the people, the general public, to engage them in this conversation.
I hear that all day long, Elle. Melissa, credo, what does it mean?
It's the Climate Resilience Demonstrator. So it's the world's first ever, as far as I'm aware, cross-sector digital twin. So they have actually managed to find a way to share data between Anglian Water, UK Power Networks and BT, so that to prepare for flooding, but also if the emergency response, if there is a flood. And they've shown things that, like, if an asset of UK Power Networks gets knocked out by flooding, that then actually knocks out Anglian Water and BT. And so, to going back to the systems approach, that means that even if Anglian Water and BT do, invest in their resilience and do everything right, it actually won't matter because UK Power Networks could get knocked out. So that starts to show us how important that data flow is. And sitting underneath that is that data sharing infrastructure. So they're like, someone was just talking about, we just need to get out there, experiment, try it. So it's a pilot to do cross-sector sharing using connected digital twins.
Okay. And Tristan, where do you feel like our biggest barriers are at the moment?
I think it is definitely our thinking and our approach. And I think many of us make the mistake of going through life with this idea of a status quo that can be maintained, and actually that there is nothing that could be considered status quo, because everything is always in a process of flux or change. So just the idea of maintaining the old order because it sort of feels more comfortable, you're shooting yourself in the foot anyway. It's a change that's happening whether you recognize it or not. So actually far better to recognize a change that can be taking things in a better and improving direction than actually staying where you are.
Okay. And Paul, how about yourself?
So I think building on this, understanding of what systems thinking really involves, because we do not have the governance in place. We do not have our built environment sector thinking as a system, one that functions in a way that creates no waste and actually maximizes the value of material flows. So I think we need to get the governance right. We need to be thinking about where those co-benefits are and what information you need to demonstrate that. That's critically important. And also we need to get the economics right, because we do not measure those externalities that have created that biodiversity loss, the poor air quality, the climate change, the very things that are going to come back and hurt us. So at the moment, we don't actually deploy the circular economy in very well. What we do is we say, well, we don't want to waste something, but we will consider how best to use it. But when we say best, we don't really mean best, because we don't actually maximize that value. And if you look at the principles of the circular economy, you'd be keeping those materials in flow in their best position possible. rather than just saying, oh, well, let's just recycle it. Why aren't
Yeah.
we actually using it or retaining it? So I think there's some real structural barriers there around governance, around what we mean by systems approach and the economics that would underpin it.
And arguably, we're not accounting for all of the data and the information in the rest of the co-benefits. We're not measuring the right things at the moment. So how do we know what the collateral impact of those decisions is? Let's move on to our sort of closing set of questions, because this is moving incredibly quickly, thanks to your fantastic insights. What are we not measuring at the moment that we need to measure for maximum impact in terms of pushing us towards and accelerating our progress with regards to the emerging circular economy? So, what are we not measuring, and what should we be measuring for maximum impact? Who wants to dive in first on this one? Open floor. Elle, you moved. Elle moved the lips. Who was first? Let's go.
I was going to talk about Part Z, which is, for those that don't know, it's legislation that should be prioritised around measuring embodied carbon. Obviously, this is just one aspect of a circular approach, but without legislation, we don't have the sticks that we can beat industry with to get them going in the right direction. So obviously, we need the whole holistic approaches around evaluation. We need all the metrics assessing social impact and environmental sustainability and economic regeneration, but specifically around the carbon side. If we were measuring the impacts from our new builds and from our retrofits, we'd be able to understand how much carbon they're emitting and how we can reduce that carbon. And obviously the answer will lie in reusing materials, and then that will push us more in the direction of material banks and having the data that is behind what those materials are and how we can use them in the future.
That's an interesting point, and I'll just dive in before going to anybody else, because we've got a question from the audience here. Ali has put forward, focusing on material flows on a project level, what aspects should be taken into account, taken into consideration in information management, and what technologies do we currently have and use that could support this? So it's that question around material flows that you've just touched on there, Elle. Do you want to expand on that in response to Ali?
Sorry, what was Ali's question?
What aspects should be taken into account with regards to material flows, and how would information management support that?
Well, things like the deconstructability, so often focusing on how we're going to construct things, we don't think about deconstruction. But I was really fascinated by Paul's presentation where he showed that factory from the 70s and an excellent reuse. But there's so few buildings that have considered the future use, and even now we're building new and retrofitting, and we're not thinking about what's happening to those materials in 20 to 30 years time even. So if we had material passports and understanding how things go together and then get deconstructed again, I think that would help us greatly.
We're going to circle in a round of mutual consensus here, and I'm going to go to Melissa next, who's nodding wildly at the idea of material passports. So, Melissa, do you want to dive in there?
Yeah, because that's what I was just going to say, is that because to me, with the metrics, it's around stocks and flows, and also around the question. So we need to know where the materials are, what condition that they're in, and that's particularly important for insurers, so they can insure them with confidence, going to reuse them, like who needs them, and then how best to get them to the new location in a carbon efficient manner, or store them until required. And so there's platforms like the Excess Materials Exchange, because they're like a matchmaking service between people with excess materials and those who need it, but they also create a digital passport. So it's and they try and go back as far as they can to the origins and to the future. But I think just in general terms, in terms of metrics, I think it's a really interesting question. There's lots of different groups that are looking at this, so including in government and local authority. And I think earlier someone mentioned local authority, so give a particular shout out to Ralph Bertram at Enfield Council, who's looking at this. Letty are about to have a paper that's about to come out. And I would say that the leading measurement in this area is the Circle Economy Gap Report. So if you haven't heard of that or read it, then please look up the Gap Report.
Trudi, this is going to be harder to respond to as we go through this, so you're bang in the middle of the people that are going to respond to it. What are your thoughts?
I mean, reflecting what the others have said, really, but again, that it's not difficult for any organisation to start initiating tracking of materials. And yes, what the others have said is brilliant, and the full materials passport and the way that's evolving will be crucial. But that sort of building up to that is possible as well. And there are many construction companies now that are now starting to, for example, QR code their products, so that goes into the digital record of the building, so people that then use it actually know what it's built of. Something that I would love for this house, which I didn't have a clue how it was built. And there's lots of small things that can be done there. But on the grander scheme, we need to move away in the industry as a whole from a project mindset all the time of engineer to order, build it, done, forget about it, because that is where everything starts to go wrong. You said about data. When we started looking for baseline data, when we were developing the manufacturing approaches and product platform rulebook, we just couldn't get it because there just aren't good enough records of almost everything that we do to be able to baseline, to be able to measure, to be able to move forward. So we have to start being better at the basics right now and then build up from there into, ideally, the full digital twin world would be fabulous, because that will enable all of the better processes and enable the circularity of everything as well.
Thanks, Trudi. Tristan, your view on where we can have the greatest impact with that?
Well, I think Trudi kind of hits the nail on the head. If we have a world that is conditioned to think in terms of fitness for purpose, particularly once you introduce sort of circularity, we have to be thinking in terms of fitness for process, which I think is an important leap to make. The other thing too is that it's back to the human piece again, because at certain levels, data in, data out, we can use the information and insights to good effect, but that is not, by any stretch of the imagination, guaranteed. If we were driven by data, as an example, 300 people last year, just under, died from fire-related causes. 12,000 people died from from occupational lung disease, and another 19,000 were added to that list. And so when Grenfell happened, which has been a catalyst for all sorts of really overdue improvements in the way the industry looks at itself, certainly on the construction side of things, is that's all really valuable. But actually, the data is showing a different need for focus than, as it were, the fire medicine that we've been told we need. And I just wonder to what extent that sort of misalignment is actually being seen in other parts of the economy.
Thanks, Tristan. It feels only fitting, really, to give Paul the sort of final word of the session after opening with such a fantastic presentation and putting all that effort into that. So once again, thank you again for that presentation, Paul. It was really brilliant. Let's end on your note.
Well, that's really kind of you to say that, Ollie. When I talked about in my presentation, the last section, there was lots of information there around data requirements and things that we need to do, and we need to do it at different levels. But just to go back to it, and it echoes a lot of what we've all agreed on today. In a sense, we need accessible data at all levels within what we've got in our cities. So we know stock take, and we also need to know where there's materials that are not being deployed and how they can then be better utilised. And so it's about information flow.
It's almost as if the internet gods are telling us to slow down, because Paul's breaking up for me, so I don't.
Okay, all right. Well,
we lost you at the end there, Paul. We're on time now.
I'm sorry. Don't.
It's all right, Paul. It's all right. I just want a massive thank you to the panel. I think the conversation has been really rapid. Everybody's made such great contributions. And to the audience for throwing in some really interesting questions into the mix. If anybody wants to get in touch with anybody, I know for a fine fact that everybody on here is very active on LinkedIn after the last months. So feel free to reach out and start some more incredibly interesting conversations around how we can progress and accelerate towards delivering the emerging circular economy. Thank you very much, everyone.